The oldest and most profound question of all, what is the meaning of life? It is a question that has haunted human beings for centuries. A question that seems to have no answer, but which is nevertheless fundamental to our existence. Viktor Frankl, the father of logotherapy, believed that the meaning of life is not something we can find ready-made, but rather something we must create each day. For Frankl, the meaning of life is not in seeking pleasure or happiness, but in finding a purpose. And this purpose is not something we can choose, but rather something that is presented to us at every moment of life. It is our ability to respond to these challenges, to find meaning in obstacles and difficulties, that allows us to experience a full and meaningful life. But how can we find this meaning? How can we know what the purpose of our life is? Frankl's answer is simple: by looking within ourselves. That's where we find our values, our beliefs, our deepest desires. That's where we find our essence, our identity. And that's where we can find the meaning of our life. However, finding the meaning of life is not an easy process. It requires courage, it requires authenticity, it requires that we let go of our masks and our security. It requires that we expose ourselves to the unknown, the uncertain, the improbable. But it is precisely on this path of self-knowledge and self-acceptance that we find true freedom. The freedom to choose, the freedom to create, the freedom to live, the freedom to find the meaning of life. It is a freedom that cannot be given by anyone, but rather conquered by ourselves. And it is precisely this freedom that allows us to live an authentic life, a full life, a meaningful life. But what is the meaning of life, after all? It is a question that has no answer. It is a question that each of us must answer for ourselves. It is a question that accompanies us throughout our lives, that challenges us every day. And it is precisely in this search, in this pursuit, that we find the true meaning of life. Finding purpose in the midst of adversity is a challenge many of us face in our lives. It's easy to find meaning and direction when things are going well, but what about when life presents us with obstacles and challenges? That's when finding purpose becomes more difficult, but also more necessary. Viktor Frankl, an Austrian psychologist who survived the Holocaust, knew this well. He endured horrific experiences in concentration camps, but even in the midst of that horror, he found purpose. Frankl realized that even in extreme conditions, people had choices to make. They could choose how to respond to their circumstances, how to deal with suffering, and how to find meaning in the midst of adversity. For Frankl, purpose was not just a matter of personal fulfillment, but a fundamental necessity for survival. He believed that without purpose, people would be lost and directionless, even in times of peace and prosperity. And in times of crisis, a lack of purpose could be fatal. However, finding purpose in the midst of adversity is not an easy task. It takes looking beyond the immediate pain and suffering and finding deeper meaning. This may require a shift in perspective, a change in focus. Instead of focusing on what is happening, you need to focus on what can be done. Instead of focusing on the pain, you need to focus on the opportunity to grow and learn. Frankl believed that finding purpose was an ongoing process. It wasn't something you found once and that was it. It was something you had to work at every day. And the best way to find purpose was to focus on the present rather than worrying about the future or regretting the past. The present is where life is happening, and it's where we can find meaning and direction. However, finding purpose in the face of adversity isn't just an individual issue. It's also a collective issue. When people come together in pursuit of a common purpose, they can create something far more powerful than they could have done individually. They can create a community that supports and sustains one another, that focuses on what can be done rather than what is happening. So finding purpose in the midst of adversity is a challenge, but it's also an opportunity. It's an opportunity for growth, for change, and for finding deeper meaning in life. It's an opportunity to find purpose that goes beyond our immediate circumstances and focuses on what really matters. And it's an opportunity to create a community that supports and sustains each other in pursuit of a common purpose. Life is a journey full of challenges, and suffering is an inevitable part of it. However, it is precisely in these moments of pain and anguish that we can find deeper meaning. Viktor Frankl, one of the most important thinkers of the 20th century, believed that suffering is not just a negative experience, but rather an opportunity to find meaning and purpose. When we face difficult situations, it is natural to ask ourselves, why? Why is this happening to me? Why am I going through this? However, Frankl reminds us that the most important question is not why, but what for. What is the greater purpose behind this suffering? What meaning can I find in this experience? Finding meaning in suffering does not mean that suffering disappears, but rather that it takes on a new purpose. Instead of being just a negative experience, suffering becomes an opportunity for growth, for learning, for development. When we find meaning in suffering, we are no longer just reacting to circumstances, we are acting with purpose. One example of this is the story of Viktor Frankl himself. During World War II, Frankl was imprisoned in a Nazi concentration camp where he lost his wife, mother, and father. However, instead of giving in to despair, Frankl found meaning in that experience. He began to help other prisoners, sharing his wisdom and hope with them. And it was precisely in that moment of great suffering that he found the greater purpose of his life. Finding meaning in suffering also doesn't mean that we minimize the pain or make it worse. It's important to recognize that suffering is real and that it's necessary to feel the pain. However, at the same time, it's important to remember that suffering isn't the only factor that defines our lives. We have the power to choose how we respond to it, to find a greater purpose that transcends the pain. Ultimately, finding meaning in suffering is a choice. It is a choice that requires courage, determination, and an open mind. It is a choice that allows us to transform suffering into something more, into something that can inspire others, into something that can leave a legacy. When we choose to find meaning in suffering, we are choosing to live a fuller, richer, more meaningful life. When we think of freedom, we automatically think of the absence of restrictions, of doing what we want, when we want. However, Viktor Frankl teaches us that freedom is not only linked to the absence of obstacles, but also to the ability to choose, even in the face of the greatest adversity. Imagine yourself trapped in a cell, without light, without water, without food. You are a prisoner of war, a victim of an oppressive regime. What is your choice? What is your freedom? The answer may surprise you. Freedom is not in the absence of walls, but in the choice of how you react to walls. You can choose whether to surrender or resist. You can choose whether to give up or fight. Frankl tells us that in the Nazi concentration camps, he and other prisoners had to make daily choices in order to survive. These were basic choices, like sharing a piece of bread or giving a cellmate a smile. These choices, however small, gave the prisoners a sense of control over their lives, even if only for a moment. And it was precisely this sense of control that gave them the strength to keep fighting. Freedom is not just a state, it is a process. It is the ability to choose how you react to difficult situations. It is the ability to find meaning in the midst of chaos. It is the ability to find light in the darkness. And it is precisely this choice that allows us to find freedom, even in the most difficult situations. You may be going through a difficult time in your life, whether it's an illness, a loss, or a financial crisis, but you have a choice about how you react to that situation. You can choose whether to give up or fight. You can choose whether to give up or seek a greater meaning. And it's that choice that will give you the freedom to find a way out of the darkness. Freedom is not something you either have or don't have. Freedom is something you choose at every moment, with every choice, with every reaction. And it is precisely this choice that allows us to find freedom, even in the most difficult situations. Life is made up of choices, and it is precisely in these choices that we find the power to give meaning to our existence. Viktor Frankl, one of the most important thinkers of the 20th century, knew this better than anyone. In his book Man's Search for Meaning, he presents us with a revolutionary vision of life and the way we choose to give it meaning. When we think of choices, we automatically think of options. Options between material things, such as buying a car or a house, or options between professional paths, such as choosing a career or a company. However, the choices that truly give meaning to life are those that involve values, principles, and beliefs. They are the choices we make about how we want to live, how we want to relate to others, and how we want to contribute to the world. In a world where society presents us with an endless array of options and stimuli, it is easy to lose focus on what really matters. It is easy to get swept up in the current of consumerism and the pursuit of immediate pleasure, forgetting that life has a greater purpose than just having fun. This is where the power of choice comes into play. This is where we can choose between living a superficial life or a life with purpose. But how do we make that choice? How can we give meaning to our lives amid so much confusion and distraction? The answer lies in finding what truly matters to us. It is finding what makes us feel alive, what makes us feel like we are doing something worthwhile. It is finding our purpose. And that's where Viktor Frankl's famous quote comes into play. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space lies our freedom. It is in that space that we can choose how we will react to situations, how we will deal with challenges, and how we will find meaning in our lives. It is in that space that we can choose between living a life according to the values and principles that guide us, or living a life according to the expectations of others. When we choose to give meaning to our lives, we are choosing to live according to our values and principles. We are choosing to live according to what truly matters to us. We are choosing to live an authentic life, a life that truly reflects who we are and what we want to achieve. And that is where we find the true power of choice. That is where we find the power to give meaning to our lives. The difference between enduring and accepting is a fundamental concept when it comes to finding meaning and purpose in our lives. We often confuse these two terms, thinking they are closely related, but Viktor Frankl teaches us that they have very different connotations. To endure something means to carry a burden, to deal with a difficult or painful situation, without necessarily agreeing with it or finding a deeper meaning. It is an attitude of resistance, of struggle, of survival. We endure when we have no choice, when life presents us with challenges that need to be faced, and often enduring is necessary. It is necessary to overcome obstacles and get to the other side. However, enduring does not necessarily mean that we are experiencing an experience of growth or development. On the other hand, acceptance is a much deeper and more complex attitude. Acceptance means recognizing reality without judging or resisting it. It is an attitude of openness, receptivity, and surrender. When we accept, we are saying yes to life, to its challenges and opportunities. Acceptance does not mean that we agree with everything that happens, but rather that we are willing to learn from experiences and find deeper meaning in them. The difference between enduring and accepting is fundamental, because when we endure, we are only dealing with the surface of the problem. Whereas when we accept, we are diving deeper. We are trying to understand why things are the way they are. Enduring is like carrying a burden, while accepting is like finding a way to carry that burden more lightly. Furthermore, enduring can lead us to a victimhood attitude, to a feeling that life is against us, whereas accepting allows us to find a sense of control and choice. When we accept, we are acknowledging that we have the power to choose how we will react to situations, how we will deal with them. This does not mean that things will magically change, but rather that we are changing our perspective. We are finding a deeper meaning in life. So the next time you're faced with a challenge, ask yourself, am I enduring or am I accepting? Am I just coping or am I trying to find deeper meaning in the situation? The difference between enduring and accepting can be the key to finding meaning and purpose in our lives. Life is made up of moments, and each moment is an opportunity to choose how we will live. Viktor Frankl, one of the most important thinkers of the 20th century, knew this better than anyone. In his book Man's Search for Meaning, he reminds us that life is not made up of big moments, but of small choices we make every day. And one of the most important choices we can make is to live in the present. When we think about the past, we often feel trapped in it. We get stuck in the memories, the pains, the joys that have already passed. And at the same time, when we think about the future, we often feel anxious, insecure, worried about what might happen. But the present is the only moment we really have. It is the only moment in which we can choose how we are going to live. And this is exactly what Viktor Frankl wanted us to understand, that life is made up of choices, and that the most important choice we can make is to live in the present. Living in the present does not mean that we should ignore the past or not think about the future. It means that we should learn from the past and use those lessons to build the present. It means that we should have goals and objectives for the future, but not allow those goals to take us away from the present. It is important to remember that the present is the only moment in which we can act, in which we can choose. And it is precisely this choice that defines who we are and how we live. One of the reasons it's so hard to live in the present is that we're constantly bombarded with information, stimuli, and distractions. We're always connected, always on our devices, always receiving news, messages, updates, and this can lead us to lose focus on the present. We can find ourselves thinking about what we're going to do tomorrow or what happened yesterday instead of focusing on the present moment. And this is exactly what Viktor Frankl called the neurosis of meaninglessness. When we lose focus on the present, we lose the meaning of life. But how can we live in the present? How can we stop worrying about the future and stop regretting the past? One way is to simply focus on our breathing. Yes, you heard me right. Our breathing. When we are breathing, we are in the present. When we are breathing, we are alive. And this is exactly what Viktor Frankl wanted us to understand, that life is made up of small moments and that each moment is an opportunity to choose how we are going to live. Another way to live in the present is to focus on the things we can control. Instead of worrying about what we can't control, we can focus on our actions, our choices, our attitudes. We can focus on how we're going to react to situations, how we're going to deal with challenges. And this is exactly what Viktor Frankl called the search for meaning. When we search for meaning, when we focus on the things we can control, we are living in the present. Living in the present is not easy. It is a daily challenge. It is a challenge that requires discipline, focus, and commitment. But this is exactly what Viktor Frankl wanted us to understand, that life is made of choices and that the most important choice we can make is to live in the present. And this is exactly what we can learn from him, that each day is a question, and that the most important answer we can give is to live in the present. Have you ever stopped to think about how gratitude can change your perspective? Viktor Frankl, one of the greatest philosophers of the last century, said that gratitude is one of the main keys to finding meaning and purpose in life. And it's easy to see why. When we focus on what we're grateful for, we shift the focus of our attention. Instead of focusing on what's missing or what's wrong, we start to see what we have and what's right. This doesn't mean we should ignore the problems or challenges we face, but it does mean that alongside those challenges, there are also things we can be grateful for. And it's this choice of focus that can change everything. Imagine you're going through a difficult time, facing a crisis or a loss. It's easy to focus on the suffering and pain, but if you stop and think about the things you're grateful for, you'll begin to see that there's a light at the end of the tunnel. Gratitude can also change the way we relate to others. When we are grateful for the people in our lives, we begin to see them in a different way. We see that they are struggling too, that they are doing the best they can, and this allows us to be more understanding, more patient, and more loving. Instead of focusing on the faults of others, we begin to see their virtues and appreciate their presence in our lives. Additionally, gratitude can change the way we feel about ourselves. When we are grateful for our lives, we begin to see that we are blessed. We see that we have opportunities that others don't, that we have skills and talents that we can use to make a difference. And this allows us to be more confident, more self-assured. Instead of focusing on our failures and mistakes, we begin to see our victories and our successes. So gratitude is not just a positive attitude, it's a choice. It's a choice we can make every day, in every moment. And it's that choice that can change our perspective, that can change the way we live and the way we feel. So today, instead of focusing on what we lack, try focusing on what we have. Try to find the things that you're grateful for and see how that can change everything. The strength of the human spirit in overcoming challenges is something that leaves us breathless. It is as if, in the midst of darkness, there were a light that guided us out of the tunnel. According to Viktor Frankl, this strength is the essence of the human being. It is the ability to find purpose, even in the most difficult moments. Think of a person who has been in a concentration camp, as Frankl was. Imagine the pain, the hunger, the loss of freedom, the lack of hope. It is in this environment that you would expect people to be broken, to lose their will to live. Yet it was in this very environment that Frankl found the strength of the human spirit in action. He saw how people, even in the midst of such suffering, found ways to help each other, to keep hope alive, to find purpose. This strength is capable of overcoming even physical pain. It is as if the human spirit has a reserve of energy that can be activated in moments of crisis. It is the ability to say no to pain, to say yes to life. It is the ability to find meaning in the midst of suffering, to find a purpose that goes beyond pain. But this strength is not exclusive to concentration camps. It is present in each of us, in every moment of our lives. It is the strength that makes us get out of bed every day, even when we are not feeling well. It is the strength that makes us fight for our dreams, even when they seem impossible. It is the strength that makes us overcome our limitations, even when they seem insurmountable. This strength is proof that a human being is more than just a body and a mind. It is proof that we have a soul, a spirit that guides and sustains us. It is proof that even in the midst of pain and suffering, we can find purpose, we can find meaning. And it is precisely this power that Viktor Frankl wants us to understand. He wants us to realize that no matter what we are going through, we have the power to choose how we will respond. We have the power to choose whether we will surrender to the pain or whether we will find purpose in the midst of the darkness. It is this choice that makes all the difference. It is this choice that allows us to overcome challenges and find happiness even in the midst of adversity. The individual responsibility to create one's own meaning is a revolutionary concept that Viktor Frankl presents to us in his work. It's easy to feel lost in a world that presents us with millions of options and expectations, but at the same time leaves us feeling empty and purposeless. This is where the individual responsibility to create one's own meaning comes into play. You can choose to live your life based on the expectations of others, whether it's your family, your friends, or society as a whole. You can strive to meet the standards of success that others have set for you. But in doing so, you're just living someone else's life. You're just fulfilling someone else's dreams instead of creating your own. But what happens when you start to question those expectations? When you start to ask yourself what it is that you really want out of life? This is where you start to create your own meaning. This is where you start to find your purpose. And this is where you start to live an authentic life. Creating your own meaning is a difficult process because it requires you to be honest with yourself. It requires you to look inside yourself and discover what it is that you truly value. It requires you to be able to say no to things that don't fulfill you, and yes to things that make you feel alive. It's a process that requires courage because you'll need to let go of other people's expectations and create your own. But the result is liberating. When you create your own meaning, you feel more connected to yourself. You feel more secure in your decisions and more confident in your choices. You begin to live a life that is truly yours, rather than one that others expect you to live. And this is where individual responsibility comes in. It's easy to blame others for not finding our purpose. It's easy to blame society for not finding our place. But the truth is that the responsibility for creating our own meaning is ours. It's our responsibility to find our purpose and live accordingly. It's our responsibility to create a life that is truly ours. So the question we must ask ourselves is, what are you doing to create your own meaning? What are you doing to find your purpose? What are you doing to live a life that is truly yours? It's a difficult question, but it's a necessary question. It's a question that can change the way you live your life. So, are you answering the question we ask ourselves every day? Are you finding meaning in the midst of adversity, or are you simply surviving? Viktor Frankl reminds us that the search for purpose is not an easy journey, but it is one worth taking. It is in the midst of darkness that we find the opportunity to discover the light that guides us. It is in the midst of suffering that we find the chance to find meaning. The choice is ours. We can choose to endure or accept. We can choose to live in the present or dwell on the past. We can choose to find gratitude in the midst of pain or surrender to hopelessness. But here's the truth. Life has no ready-made meaning. Meaning is created by us, in every choice, in every decision, in every moment. And it is this freedom of choice that gives us the power to create our own destiny. So don't wait for meaning to be given to you. Create it. Find it in adversity. Find it in suffering. Find it in choosing to live in the present. Find it in gratitude. Because in the end, the question is not, what is the meaning of life? The question is, what am I doing to create my own meaning? And the answer to that question is the key to a life of purpose, meaning, and true freedom. Now that you've discovered that every day is a question, are you ready to answer it? Leave your comment below and share how you are answering life's questions. And if you want more inspiring content like this, subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss any new videos. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.